Oh. That's very kind. That is very kind. But good morning, my friends. This is my third time addressing you as your General Secretary. And if I've learned anything in that time, it is this. A union is not sustained by positions, not by buildings, not even by its history, but it's sustained by people. So I want to begin with thanking some people. I firstly want to thank the staff at the Brighton Centre for looking after us so well this week. Thank you to our technical support, to George and everyone at Mammoth. I want to say a heartfelt thank you to our BSL interpreters, whose work makes it possible for everyone in this hall to participate fully and equally. My sincere thanks go to the staff of the National Education Union. Their work may not always be visible, but it is felt every day in the strength and effectiveness of this union. I especially want to thank colleagues on the Speaker's Cards table. And I also want to thank Jane Townsend. Now, I mentioned Jane last year. She has worked for the NUT and the NEU for over 40 years. And Jane's retiring this year. And I want to thank Jane and her colleague Alison, who has also given over 40 years, and to wish them the best and with our sincerest thanks. I will also use this opportunity to publicly welcome the election of Sarah to her position as Deputy General Secretary. We are honoured to have her as part of the union's leadership. And I'd also like to congratulate Ed, not only for his chairing of the debate, but for his inspiring speech. It was a speech that centred the child, that centred education, that centred the values that we hold dear as educators, that centred the education system we need. So thank you, Ed. I'd like to thank our international guests. This year we've had more than ever before, and we honour the courage it takes to cross borders, not just of distance, but of struggle, to stand together in common cause. I'd like to especially thank my friend Olga from Ukraine. And a special thanks to those who have travelled from Cuba, from Lebanon, from Palestine and Iran. Those who come to us in the shadow of Donald Trump's imperial aggression, reminding us that solidarity is not a word, but a duty we owe to one another until all of us are free. But conference, I also want to thank you, the reps, the activists, the officers, because it's you who give this union its meaning, its soul, its conscience, and its moral direction. You are the NEU, and whenever injustice demands an answer, this union never remains silent. Now, I was proud to stand with you on the Together March last Saturday, not because we were loud, though we were, not because we were many, though we were, but because we led. We marched to say that hate dressed up as common sense is still hate, that division, however loudly shouted, does not become truth, that racism and fascism do not gain legitimacy simply because they are repeated. We marched to refuse a politics that can only survive by pointing its finger downwards, by naming the vulnerable as the cause of what they did not create. We marched to name a cruelty that blames strength and baptizes violence as courage, knowing that a politics born of fear can teach nothing, can nurture nothing. And we marched deliberately and unapologetically to insist on something that our opponents fear far more than our anger, that stubborn belief that we belong to one another, that love is a political force, and that unity, once claimed, cannot be defeated. Together, conference, we made history. Conference, it is your collective effort, your persistence, your discipline. It is your refusal to surrender to the fatigue of daily life in the classroom, your refusal to accept fear as the price that we must pay for living in a turbulent world that sustains this union and makes us who we are. This is a great union. Now, our amazing treasurer, Hazel Danson, presented you with a graph in her closed session. And what did it show? It showed that despite losing 44,000 teachers from the profession last year, we remain a growing union, bucking the trend of union decline, growing in membership. Growing in membership, growing in activity, and growing in confidence. And conference, let me tell you this proudly. School support staff are the fastest growing section of this union. Because in this union, we organise every worker who keeps education alive. Whether you are in the independent sector or the state sector, in the school or the college, in the kitchen or the classroom, whether you are supply staff or support staff, if you're in the building and you are not in the union, you should be in the NEU. We are a growing union because we are a fighting union, and we fight because year after year our schools have been commanded to survive on less, to endure scarcity as though it were a virtue, and to accept neglect as though it were fate. Our classrooms have been running on emptied not by accident, but by political choice, with educators expected to close the gap with their own labour, their own care, their own exhaustion. We fight because every child deserves an education that tells them they matter, and every parent has the right to expect a system that does not abandon their children at the classroom door. We fight for the dignity and self-respect of teachers and support staff, because no society that degrades its educators can claim to value its future. Conference, this is what defines us. We are a union that fights, and we fight to save education. And yes, this fight often requires industrial action. Now, we speak of lighting fires, not because we are speaking of recklessness. No NEU member takes industrial action lightly. We speak of it because history has taught us a truth, that power rarely listens until it is made uncomfortable, and that silence has never protected a classroom, an educator, or a child. Through experience, we have learned what cannot be denied. We have fought against cuts and closures, against restructures and redundancies, against chronic work intensity and mismanagement, against corruption dressed up as efficiency, and against the discrimination faced by overseas teachers. But when members find the courage to fight, that courage does not remain private. It spreads. And when courage spreads, the union grows, not only in number, but in strength and in our capacity to win. Now, I want to say this plainly, because the plain truth matters. I am proud of every single member who takes a stand, because life in our schools and colleges is hard, and courage is never abstract. It is lived daily. Now, the true measure of any trade union is whether it can improve the working lives of its members. Now, conference, we must recommit ourselves to that task. We must recommit ourselves together to saving education. And when members make a stand, when they fight and when they win, we should celebrate their wins and be proud. Like I'm proud of Alex, a rep I met just last week at Catcher Hatch Junior School in Enfield, where 18 schools are out on strike against punitive sickness absence policies, because dignity, once challenged, must be defended. I'm proud of Duncan and our post-16 members who were prepared to take industrial action and in doing so secured a pay deal that they viewed as acceptable, proving again that preparedness is the beginning of power. I'm proud of Maria and the members at Brick Lane School taking on a profit-making, private equity-owned independent school to demand nothing more and nothing less than fair terms and conditions. I'm proud of Megan in Camden and our members at the Great Ormond Street Hospital School, who took 14 days of strike action in defence of 4 NEU activists, including their rep, after they raised concerns about bullying behaviour, because silence in the face of injustice is never neutral. And I'm proud of Emily and all of our reps at the Star Academies in Lancashire, who pushed back against the imposition of a virtual teacher, because education is not simulation and it cannot be automated. I'm proud of our members at Flint High School in North Wales, who took 12 days of action and forced Flintshire County Council to act on concerns about bullying behaviour, because persistence, when collective, changes outcomes. I'm proud of Abby, an inspirational rep that I met at Sydenham High School, who led a powerful dispute on workload and working hours, because exhaustion is not a professional standard. I'm proud of Michaela, Sheila, John, and every member across Bristol and Somerset who took part in the Cathedral Schools Trust dispute, where alongside Unison, we secured years of back pay for support staff who had been underpaid, because we will never accept support staff being undervalued. And of course, I'm proud of Chris, Amy, Connor, and all the reps and the 800 members at Arthur Terry Learning Trust. Over 100 jobs threatened with financial mismanagement at the top. And what did our members do? They organised, they met in every school, they recruited reps, they took strike action, and they won. Redundancies withdrawn, every demand met, and those responsible for the crisis gone. Conference, there is so much for us to be proud of. Trust-wide disputes taking on the worst aspects of academisation, more reps trained than ever before, more fights, more victories. But pride, if it is to mean anything, must lead us somewhere. It must open doors, not close them. It must widen our sense of who we are. And that brings me to our school support staff. Conference, little over a month ago, was our special conference. It was one of my proudest moments as your General Secretary to see you exit the unjust and unworkable TUC-brokered agreement of 2017 that restricted our ability to organise the school support staff, that restricted our ability to fight for low-paid women workers, restricted our ability to fight on whole school issues. Now, I've always been clear with you of my view. As the second largest school support staff trade union, there's no moral justification for our exclusion from national bargaining arrangements. And there is no moral justification to say that we cannot organise support staff members on workplace issues. But I have been equally clear. The question before us is not one of inter-union rivalries, but how do we organise the most unorganised section of the education workforce? And it's incumbent on trade unions to work collectively to solve this. Now, conference, I value the TUC. I value our role within the TUC. We often lead the work in the TUC on anti-racism, on Palestine. I will never advocate for leaving it. But if the trade union movement is to survive, let alone thrive, then it must respond to the rapidly changing world of work. And I say that in the best of solidarity. I think I've had a little accident there. However, conference, I do need to tell you that since our special conference a little over a month ago, the TUC General Council have voted to launch an investigation into the NEU over a breach of TUC rules. The TUC General Council has put the NEU on trial. So, conference, for the crime of organising low-paid women workers, how do we plead? Guilty. For the crime of insisting the NEU, the second largest support staff union, belongs on the SSSMB, how do we plead? And conference, for the crime of choosing progress over decline, unity over sectionalism, and workers at the centre of our movement, how do we plead? Conference, our only crime is wanting to organise colleagues who are the worst paid, wanting to organise colleagues who are seen as the most expendable, wanting to give these colleagues the confidence to collectively assert their dignity and be heard. And conference, we will organise these colleagues fully, proudly and unapologetically. Our only crime is wanting to organise the heartbeat of our classrooms, and for that we should be proud to be guilty, for the arc of moral justice is on our side. But where do we go from here? Now, we have broken with an outdated agreement, but I do think we should seek a new agreement with sister unions. But any new agreement has to answer the question of how we organise the 70% of support staff who are not in any union. Now, I've always believed that unions in education must face this reality together. I do not believe in competitive trade unionism. I do not believe in poaching. I do not believe in discounted offers or in undercutting one another or mistaking rivalry for strength. That path leads only to division. That path leads only to division, and division has never organised a single worker, but it has helped every boss. What I believe deeply, is that there is another way, a way rooted in cooperation, a way where the NEU, Unite, GMB and Unison work together to organise the unorganised. Because unity is not a slogan, it is a responsibility. And conference, with the government failing to deliver on its promise for education, unity matters now more than ever. The new Ofsted framework, the curriculum and assessment review, the children's wellbeing bill, the white paper. Now, whilst much of the headline rhetoric can be welcomed, the policy detail just does not deliver. On Ofsted, we were offered the language of change, but we know better than to confuse a change of language with a change of power. If the machinery of fear remains intact, then there is no change. There is only rebranding, the same threat, the same damage, the same distress. Ofsted needed to go then, and it needs to go now. On curriculum and assessment, the promise to redefine Progress 8 matters, but it's not a promise kept if we keep children trapped in a culture of high-stakes testing, a culture that shrinks their education to what can be measured, and then has the nerve to call that measurement valid, even as it punishes the schools serving the poorest communities. And on the Children's Wellbeing Bill, let us tell the truth without apology. 500,000 more children getting free school meals is not a gift from above. It's what happens when this union campaigns alongside others. It's what happens when communities refuse to be shamed into silence. And it's what happens when a movement will not accept child poverty as normal or inevitable or as somehow deserved. This government invites us to believe that this white paper marks a turning point. Now, we've heard that invitation before. We have watched turning points arrive on paper and leave quietly without ever reaching the children who were promised the future. It speaks of every child achieving and thriving, as though the distance between those two words and the lives of our pupils can be crossed by intention alone. But intention has never taught a child to read. Intention has never hired the support staff a child needs. Intention has never repaired a crumbling building. Commitment has, investment has, and truth has. And the truth is this: you cannot build a fair education system on exhausted workers and underfunded schools. You cannot promise inclusion whilst you starve the services that make inclusion real. You cannot talk about children thriving while you ignore the conditions in which educators are expected to work, and then act surprised when the whole system begins to break under the weight of your neglect. For years now, teachers and support staff have been asked to compensate for failures of policy with their own resilience, as though resilience were a funding stream, as though care were an endless resource, as though exhaustion were a plan. When funding falls short, educators improvise. When services disappear, educators absorb the loss. When need rises, they stretch themselves thinner still until what is called coping is really just quietly carrying on with what the government has chosen to drop. That's not reform. That is displacement. And no white paper, however polished, however well written, can disguise the fact that responsibility has been moved, not met. Now, this document speaks of ambition, but ambition without funding is not ambition at all. It is performance. It's the state writing checks with words and asking schools to cash them with people's well-being. Responsibility is being pushed downwards onto schools already managing overcrowded classrooms, rising need and shrinking specialist support, until leadership becomes a euphemism for doing the impossible with too little. Now, responsibility is being pushed onto support staff, whose work is essential and skilled, and yet too often treated as optional, until the very people who make inclusion possible are the first to be cut, the lowest to be paid, and the quickest to be blamed. Responsibility is being pushed onto families, forced to fight for what should be guaranteed, forced to become experts in a bureaucracy that they did not build, simply to secure what their children deserve as a matter of right. Now, the NEU is clear. If the government is serious about children and thriving, then it must be serious about long-term, sustained investment in education. Investment that reaches the classroom, that respects the workforce and meets the scale of need with the scale of resource. Anything less is simply asking working people to carry a promise that was never properly funded. Now, the impact of austerity, a narrow curriculum, of harmful social media is having an impact on many of the young people that we teach. The motion on behaviour was one of our most prioritised this year. But we are a union that is clear about what is happening to our children. Because what our members are describing is not a failure of children. It's not a sudden moral collapse amongst the young. It is instead the predictable consequence of a system that has been asked too much, given too little, and then acted surprised by the result. We have a generation that's been brought up under austerity. When 2/3 of teachers tell us that behaviour is undermining learning in their classrooms, what they're really telling us is that the classroom has become the front line of every unresolved crisis in our society. Hunger walks in with the children. Anxiety takes a seat at the back of the room. Unmet special emotional needs raise their hands every morning and they are told to wait and wait again. And we know that waiting is not neutral. Waiting shapes lives. We have created schools where teachers are expected to manage complexity without support, trauma without training, and rising need without the resources to meet it. We have told them to deliver results while stripping away the very things that make learning human: time, creativity, space, and care. So when behaviour fractures, it's not disorder we are seeing, it is distress. Our members are clear. They speak of classrooms stretched thin by understaffing, of children whose needs have been identified but never met, of young people shaped by online worlds that reward cruelty, speed, and spectacle, while schools are left to repair the damage with nothing more than goodwill and grit. And we must tell the truth about who is profiting from this. The social media giants owned by sleazy degenerates who design platforms to keep children hooked, who amplify misogyny because it drives engagement, and who treat humiliation as a business model. Now, our nation's schools have been starved for more than a decade, not neglected by accident, but diminished by design. Year after year, choice after choice, made far from the classroom, but paid for it inside. Today, nearly 3/4 of schools are operating with less funding than they had in 2010. And when you do that long enough, the consequences stop being theoretical. They become visible. They become human. They show up in overcrowded classrooms, in exhausted educators who have given everything they have and are now leaving because there is nothing left to give. In buildings so neglected that they crumble around the very children they are meant to beget. Last week, more than 20 head teachers came together in Liverpool to talk about what these cuts meant in real terms. And their stories were not dramatic. They were familiar. Teachers forced to make the best of inadequate spaces, using cupboard corners, borrowed rooms, and makeshift solutions just to give children the specialist support they deserve. The quiet despair of writing yet another letter home, explaining that another brilliant teacher is leaving, not because they've stopped caring, but because caring under these conditions has become impossible. This is the truth of underfunding. And this is why we cannot be polite about it. And this is why we must strain every sinew to mobilise every educator in this country to demand collectively the funding that our schools need. Because without it, we are asking schools to perform miracles whilst denying them the tools to even survive. And that is why the time to save education is now. And that is why, if necessary, we will deliver national industrial action to save it. Save Education is not a campaign for comfort. It is a campaign for the right of every child to be taught in a properly staffed, properly supported school, and for every educator to do this work without being ground down. Now, we are not going to wait for permission to save education. We're not going to wait for another crisis to prove what we already know. We are going to lead because that is what this union does. Now, conference, children need change. Their families need change. Their communities need change. And our members, like millions of others, voted for change in 2024 because life has become too hard, too precarious, too unequal to be endured any longer. Now, they did not vote for motion without movement. They didn't vote for language without substance. They voted because they believed something fundamental needed to be made right. Now, the truth is, clinging to a failed economic orthodoxy will not deliver the change people voted for or the change that they desperately need. It will deliver the familiar disappointments instead. Pay rises that fall short of dignity, public services that are stretched to breaking point, and opportunities rationed rather than shared. And people know this. They feel it in their wages, in their classrooms, in their hospitals, in their homes, which is why so many who place their hope in Labour now feel that hope slipping away. Now, 65% of our NEU members who voted Labour in 24 tell us that they will not do so again. Now, that is not a statistic to be diminished or dismissed or even explained away. It's a warning. And history teaches us that warnings ignored become consequences. Now, let me be really clear. We are proudly independent of all political parties. And that independence matters because it allows us to speak the truth even when it is uncomfortable. And it is for that reason that we welcome the contribution this week from Green Party leader Zach Polanski. It wasn't because we agree on everything, but it's because the Greens are offering something too rare in politics, a belief that things can be done differently, a belief that the economy exists to serve people rather than to discipline them, and a vision of education that is built on possibility rather than scarcity. It should surprise no one that the Green Party now commands the greatest support amongst NEU members. Now, people are not volatile. They are responding to what they see and what they do not. And let me say this plainly. I don't want this government to fail. I want this government to listen. I want it to understand where it's gone wrong and to recognise what it must do if it is to honour the hopes of those who voted for change. But conference, while some offer a politics of hope, we must also confront a darker reality. Because there is a party that is trading in fear, a party that is feeding on anxiety and redirecting it towards blame. It's a party that offers anger instead of solutions and scapegoats instead of answers. So let me say clearly, without hesitation, that Reform, they offer no solution to the crisis in living standards. They have nothing to say about low pay or collapsing services or exhausted workers. Instead, they point downwards at migrants, at refugees, at LGBT plus people, as though cruelty were some substitute for policy. A Reform government would be a disaster for education, a disaster for the NHS, a disaster for working class communities, and a disaster for trade unions. So let me be clear again. We will not stand by. The NEU will challenge scapegoating wherever it appears. We will challenge discrimination in all its forms, and we will challenge the lies, because lies thrive when good people fall silent. And that is why we were at the heart of last Saturday's march. That is why we mobilised our districts in their thousands. That is why we helped give voice to the anti-racist majority in this country, because Saturday was not the end, it was the beginning. Because marches matter, but what matters even more is what happens next. In staff rooms, in workplaces, in communities, it is the quiet, patient work of conversation and organising. It is there that we say to people, you are not wrong to feel left behind. You are not wrong to worry about wages or housing or the future of your children. You are not wrong to feel that the system is failing you, but you are being lied to if you are told that migrants are the cause, or refugees, or Muslims. The truth is harder and it is simpler. The fault lies with a political and economic system that has protected wealth at the top whilst asking everyone else to make do with less. That has put the interests of a few ahead of the dignity of the many. Conference, this has to stop. Conference on Saturday, we showed that we have the numbers, but now we need the organisation. Organisation to build power in our workplaces and communities, and organisation to confront the far right when it marches, because the streets belong to us, and the future does too. Together, Conference, we have achieved so much. Together, we have much more to do, and acting together, acting with courage, with patience, with solidarity, we can win a better vision of education, a better vision of childhood, and a better future for all. Together, conference, we are unstoppable. Thank you. Who wants to sing a song? So last year, conference, I sang you a song and I sang out of tune. I've now got my friend Lewis from Leeds. Lewis Pugh. We're going to sing a song. We're going to dedicate it to, Lewis, are we going to dedicate it to all support staff who are not in a union?
Absolutely.
Yeah? Come on, Lewis.
Tremendous.
Over to you.
You're going to join us for that?
I can help you with the chorus, Lewis.
Certainly can. Afternoon conference, this is a great honour for me. Thank you very much. And, thank you, Daniel. This was a song from the 1930s written by a lady called Aunt Molly Jackson. It's from the Kentucky coal mining strikes. I changed the lyrics around a few years ago when we were on strike in 2023. So please do join me for a sing-song. Just like I say to my kids, if you don't join in with everyone, I'll make you sing on your own at the front. It goes like this. I am a union man, just as strong as I can be. I do not like the bosses, and the bosses don't like me. Join the NEU, oh, join the NEU. Right, that's your bit. Right, me then you. Join the NEU, oh, join the NEU. Try it. Oh, louder. Well, I was raised in old West Yorkshire born and bred. When I joined the Union boys, well, they called me the Russian Red. Join the NEU, oh, join the NEU. Again, join the NEU, oh, join the NEU. Well, there's money enough for the bombs, not enough for schools. And if they think we're buying that, then they must take us for fools. Join the NEU, oh, join the NEU. Join the NEU, oh, join the NEU. Just you. Join the NEU. One more. One more. Join the NEU right now. Join the NEU. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes.